It's a big night, it's live, it's on throughout the night, and we're covering it for you once an hour. It is, of course, the 92nd Oscars. Doesn't time fly when you're giving out awards? And to guide us with their predictions and the news as it emerges, delighted to welcome back to talkSPORT Extra Time, our main man each and every Friday with small screen, big film recommendations, Van Connor. Good morning, Van.
And a good morning to you as well, Paul.
And the woman he mentions each and every Friday, the fantastic Rebecca Perfect. Hello, Rebecca, and welcome. Is it your first time on talkSPORT?
It is indeed. Good morning.
Now, let me ask you this straight early doors. Are you a sports fan in any way, shape or form?
Voyeuristically through my husband, yes.
And whom does he follow?
Good choice.
Wolves, actually.
Oh, great season for him then so
there
far.
We go.
There's joy and jubilation in the Perfect household.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with a talk overview of these Oscars. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of controversy about the lack of diversity as it's perceived to be, Van, but also we've got the prospect of possibly, I think for the first time, a foreign language film, Korean at that, winning Best Picture Oscar. So it's a kind of game of two halves as far as the Oscars are concerned on that
Game
front.
of two halves. Again, with the wording.
Hey, so who's going to be sick as a parrot then? Now, what do you think about this diversity question? It's also troubled and plagued the BAFTAs this year.
It has. I mean, the BAFTAs were a lot worse with it, I think, than the Academy are. But to be honest with you, this year, Parasite is unfortunately in the position of having to carry a lot of the weight of that. Having said that as well, it doesn't bode well for the Oscars this year, the state of things, because it's interesting that they've overlooked so many choices that are of significant quality, but are obviously of diverse amounts as well. And you look at people like Jennifer Lopez, you look at Lupita Nyong'o, you look at No Love Whatsoever for The Farewell, there's no attention paid to Booksmart, which, as well as being a female-driven thing, also has a lot of LGBT cred going for it as well. It's a shame that these films are not recognised. And I say a shame, it's an actual travesty. Particularly in the case of, for instance, J-Lo. And I literally never thought I would be in the position of ever saying that J-Lo should get an Oscar nomination.
Having sat through Made in Manhattan with my daughters, I know exactly where you are. Although she was great in Out of Sight, wasn't she?
Oh, Out of Sight. My God, what a movie. The reason I carry a zipper lighter to this day is that movie. But
that is 40 a day Rothman's habit. I'm joking, of course.
Exactly, yeah.
And Rebecca, let me ask you which way you think it's going to go this year, because I don't think it's going to be one of the... I think only 3 times in Oscar history has one film got the big 5, which is like Best Film, Best Director, Actress, Actor and Screenplay.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a clean sweep, I think, this year.
I don't think it is. No, and I think, Joker's got 11 nominations, followed very closely behind by The Irishman, 1917 and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So, there's big hitters out there, but there isn't going to be a clean sweep. Probably the one that's going to get the most number of awards is probably going to be 1917 across the board, the technical categories, as well as possibly the front runner for Best Picture and Best Director as well. So the 2 biggies at the end of the night. Is it going to, is it going to be a predictable Oscars? Unfortunately, I think it probably is. Parasite, as Van mentioned, is probably the biggest upstart, if any. But what we saw with Roma a couple of years ago was we all thought that Roma was going to pick up the big Best Picture Oscar, and actually it ended up only picking up the Best International Film. So we might see that again.
Do you think the Netflix connection played against it there? Because I think the only Netflix one in with a chance is American Factory, produced for Netflix by Michelle and Barack Obama's company.
Yeah. That's
up for Best Documentary. Again, there still seems to be, as we can, a certain kind of snobbery about Netflix and Amazon Prime.
We say that, but it's had 20 nominations across the board. So we've got great films that are Netflix-based. We've got Marriage Story, we've got The Irishman, which is obviously that huge Scorsese film.
Although no nomination for De Niro.
No, that is an interesting stuff. I mean, snubs across the board is an interesting one, because even if we look at the Best Directing category, where's Greta Gerwig in this? And I know Van will disagree with me on this, but in terms of the female, presence within that, in Oscar history, there has only been 5 female directors ever nominated. Only 1 has ever won, which is Catherine Bigelow for The Hurt Locker. We're supposed to be seeing like a progressive change in the awards, and we're just not seeing that. It's a real shame.
And what do you think about the, as far as the notion goes, of films like The Irishman? Because I must say, I thought it was a kind of overhyped flat movie, if I'm being brutal about it. It reminded me of a made-for-TV film, better directed, from the 1980s.
Well, it's funny you say that, because obviously one of the things that gets thrown at Netflix a lot is the Spielberg argument. These are TV movies, which, don't get me wrong, that comment coming from Spielberg to begin with is hilarious, because the man literally started his career on a TV movie. So, I don't know. To be honest with me, I think I have no personal, degradation towards Netflix. I am a big Netflix supporter. I look at the films that they put out, and I would argue that Six Underground works just as well for... I know it's not in any way an awards contender, but something like Six Underground, for instance, for me, works just as well on the big living room TV as it does on an IMAX screen. Because
I'm of an age to remember the first multiplexes when literally some of the screens I went to see over in Leytonstone and Leighton in North East London was smaller than the TV I've got in my front room now, genuinely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you're in a darkened room with other people, but the screen was tiny.
But you do look at something like The Irishman, that is 3:35, 3
Yeah,
hours 35
around
minutes,
that.
something like that. It's more than 3.5 hours long. Now, I queued at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning at the LFF, the London Film Festival, to see the 9 a.m. screening. And I would argue that I don't think I would have particularly lost anything if I had had that first viewing experience of that film on my TV at home and had the ability to stop and pause that film and go and pee and make a cup of tea, which I think you need to
Not
3 or
necessarily
4
that one,
times during The Irishman, because it lasts about 4 days. It's a great movie, but it goes on a bit.
But you know what? I think with Netflix, the progression of Netflix is actually showing that the Academy is actually picking up on the consumers' habits now. They're watching habits for content, because we are seeing 20 nominations. We didn't see that a couple of years ago. And if there's any sort of progression for the Academy Awards, it is that. It's the slight acceptance of Netflix within it rather than pushing back against it.
Now, I won't hold you to it, partly because I don't think we're going to be on air when the big announcements are made. But do you both want to risk a prediction? Who do you think Rebecca's going to get the best film and maybe best actor and actress?
I think that 1917 is going to win Best Film. I would love to see Parasite do it, but I think it is going to be 1917. Best actor, Joaquin Phoenix for Joker is my prediction, and Renee Zellweger for Judy as well. Very predictable. They've won all the awards as we've been going along the awards season, but I can't see anyone else beating those performances.
We've got the exact same set of picks. That's the annoying part. We've spent too much time together, Bex. That's exactly what
So
that
you're
is.
going for 1917, Joaquin Phoenix and Renee as well?
Renee as well, yes. Best director, though, I think will go to Bong Joon-ho. I think they will throw the Best Director Oscar
That's
to
what's so
Bong Joon-ho.
perverse, I think, about the Oscars when that happens, that if you're the best director, how come your film doesn't then get best film?
Yeah, it's like
What were you
Bridesmaid,
directing?
Never the Bride.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was the Argo equation a few years ago? Was it that Argo wasn't nominated for Best Picture, but Ben Affleck won Best Director or something like that?
I don't even think it came to that. I'm not sure on that. But I think Alfonso Cuarón, he picked it up 1 year, and there's all these comparisons that happen year on year, and it's interesting to see the situation that we're in yet again. Every year we come back and we talk about the Oscars, and there's always some sort of controversy. There's always something that they haven't quite got right, and it happened in the BAFTAs last week as well. So it's not just across the pond.
And I'll leave you with this chunk of our chat, because Van and Rebecca are back in the next hour and each and every hour. Big anniversary this week, okay? 80 years ago, tomorrow's date, February the 10th, the very first Tom and Jerry cartoon was released. And, of course, Tom and Jerry won 7 Oscars over their short film. I know, in the time when the first run was happening, from 1940 to 1958, they won 7 Oscars. Isn't that fantastic?
That's an amazing
I
bit
think
of knowledge.
there's a rebooted live-action CG hybrid movie coming out,
don't
I
say
think,
that.
at the end of
Sacrilege.
this year.
Sacrilege, really?
Yeah,
I mean,
so. I don't think they'll talk in this one, though.
Yeah,
because
I know.
when I was a kid, that movie came out, it was terrible.
Yeah.
But
So more from Van and Rebecca coming up. And on the way, we are talking football and championship football at that with Paul Jiggins, tip-top football writer from the Sun newspaper. If you want to join the conversation, you know where we are. 08717 223344. If it's on your mind, get it on the radio. More from the Oscars with Van and Rebecca Perfect in the next hour. In fact, coming up, football with Paul Jiggins after this. By land. Hey, I was watching Lawrence of Arabia yesterday, and we are catching up with Van Conn and Rebecca Perfect once an hour as the Oscars, I think, may have just gone underway or are very much about to start. And of course, we're getting lots of red carpet stuff, Rebecca, aren't we? Rebecca Perfect and Van Conn are here with us.
Yes, we were just actually noting that Timothée Chalamet is wearing some sort of bomber jacket on the red carpet. We're like, of the biggest award night of the year, I'm not sure that that's the way to go. But the girls are looking gorgeous, much more classic looking, actually, this year in terms of their outfit choices. So it's very, very nice, very glamorous. We're going back to that rather than sort of more outrageous, although Billy Porter has shown up in a dress, as he always does, and he looks actually like an Oscar this year.
It always confuses me when I hear the name Billy Porter, because there was a brilliant song by Mick Ronson, who was David Bowie's guitarist. It charted, called Billy Porter. And I wonder if that's his real name, or if he was inspired by the great glam rocker Mick Ronson from the early 1970s.
We'll do some research and come back to you on it.
Might dig that out for a show another morning. So, then we've got your predictions, you and Rebecca's, because you do a great kind of podcast together. Tell us about that, how we can find you online, you guys.
you can find Bex and I on a Friday morning on podcast platforms on the Off Screen Show, when, effectively, because you and I do TV movies together once a week,
Yep.
we do
on a Friday on talkSPORT.
Yeah,
Extra
we
Time.
do Friday, Saturday, and Sundays TV movie picks. One of the things we get to do on the show, as well as review all the new movies that are in cinemas for the weekend, is we get to do the full week's version of that. We also get to look at what's coming out on DVD the following Monday. We get to look at the things that are launching on streaming platforms that week. And of course, it's just fun for Bex and I.
It is, of course. It's your 7-day guide to everything movies. That is kind of how we position it. And we love it because there's such a varied amount, especially on your telly box. Yeah. There's always so much that you can watch there. And Van does have a good pick every week of what he likes. And sometimes he has to educate me on that.
It's been fun. That's been fun.
Although, he always seems to, on the selection he does for us, and we have half a dozen movies to choose, he loves a bit of a rom-com.
Yes, I noticed
rom-com
that.
under the wire.
Rom-com and action movies.
Rom-coms and action movies. Look, I'm a bit of a softie, but I do like an explosion.
And I suppose rom-coms this week with Valentine on the way, of course, is predictable. Are the Oscars in trouble and the awards are in trouble on TV, would you say, Ben? Because this is earlier than normal, I think, the Oscars. And I think last few years, the viewing figures have dipped a bit.
It has come around earlier this year than usual, but I think the whole calendar seems to have shifted forward because obviously the BAFTAs have come, they stayed a week in front of the Oscars as they always do.
In their craven way, as you know, I don't approve of that. It used to be May, didn't it?
They did,
but nobody turned up, but they sent their fridges or their pet poodle along to receive the awards. So they have to get in front of the Oscars now, which really is, particularly given that an awful lot of the films that get nominated have barely been released in British cinemas. Nobody ever has had a chance to see them, but they're up for a British Academy of Film and Television Arts Award.
Well, I say we do get films every year when the Oscars roll around. You and I, we've had 3 of us have done this for a couple of years now, and we've obviously always known that when we've done this, there are films that we get to talk about that we'll have seen in a professional capacity that aren't available in UK cinemas for up to 3 months after the Oscars, and some of them are absolutely deranged. I mean, I think films just absolutely bizarre choices that it's up for so many awards. Why is this not already out in UK cinemas? But it's just one of those weird flukes of the release system. And
I suppose as well, it's one of those things, it gives some films another boost or lease of life, either on the big screen, Rebecca, or even for DVD or download promotions.
Yeah, absolutely, because actually after award season finishes, it's kind of that down period of movies where you kind of look at your list and kind of go, really? I'm going to go and watch this. And then it picks back up again in the summer with your tentpole movies as well, and then it goes back into award season. So we can always predict the ebb and flow of what we can see here. But it's interesting that this is the Academy Awards has been brought forward so much. It's actually conflicting with New York Fashion Week at the moment. So people like Tom Ford have had to do a West Coast fashion show so that they can still dress all of the actors and actresses for the Oscars. So it's
and he's a film director, of course, himself, isn't he, Tom Ford?
Yeah, exactly. So what is his love? Which one's he going for? So he's managed to accommodate it this year.
We also had, though, because of this shift, we also had that the BAFTAs clashed with the Super Bowl this year, so that was difficult in our house.
Well, J-Lo, although not getting a nomination, she managed to get some airtime at least. So.
And what a show! I mean,
and is it possible to pick out trends in films from the past 12 months? I mean, sometimes we know there are a couple of films on the back of the huge success of Gladiator, like the ill-fated Troy, when they seem to be returning to the kind of sword and sand epics. Has there been anything emerging from the past year?
It's funny you say that because this week was the release of, every week sees the release of one of the Honest trailers that Screen Junkies put out, and their one this week was the Oscars 2020, in which they just lampooned all of the Oscar films. And they did make a strangely intelligent observation about trends in films this year, which includes stories from the eyes of a precocious young boy and inappropriate laughter. Those are two, the number of films up for Oscars this year that involve inappropriate laughter. And of course, obviously, the biggie is Joker, for instance, the scene when he's on the bus and he's just cackling away to himself. Parasite, for instance, has a sequence when a character towards the end is cackling insanely against his will. And of course, you can look at the films about stories through the eyes of young children. Obviously, Jojo Rabbit is the one for there, and dysfunctional relationships seem to be a thing this year as well. As far as trends go, they always seem to come in pairs. Yeah, that seems to be the case.
I did wonder, Rebecca, a couple of years ago, we seem to be seeing, maybe for the first time in a long time, horror films taken more seriously with things like Get Out. But that again, it seems to have faded away.
Well, do you know what? Again, one of the big snubs, as I think Van mentioned earlier, is Lupita Nyong'o for Us. Another great turn. And again, one of the things that proves the lack of diversity that we're seeing amongst the Academy Awards this year, and also within the BAFTAs. But actually, I'm more surprised that we are not seeing her nominated here, because again, Jordan Peele, his body of work, although small, has been incredibly well received, and because Get Out was such a success in terms of nominations. Is it last year or the year before?
Get Out, I think, was the year before
last. Yeah, it did very, very well. And we were like, yes, we're on the up with this. And then suddenly we've dipped back down again. It's a shame, really. And it's an interesting, I mean, is this providing a disappointing trend for the future? Are they actually going to continue this sort of downward spiral of lack of diversity again? I mean, we're going to probably be talking about diversity all throughout the night because it's going to be such a big issue on all of the major categories.
And the other thing I do wonder is, Van, whether we do need, or the Academy should think in terms of more like the Golden Globes, which has a comedy or musical category, because it's very rare. In fact, I can't think, apart from, decades ago when comedies get the best film.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the things I was surprised that we didn't see in the nominations this year, and I genuinely had money on it happening, I genuinely thought we might see a Best Supporting Actor nomination for... You're going to think I'm nuts.
Hang on, Adam Sandler.
Well, stranger things have happened now, evidently. But I thought Daniel Craig for Knives Out might get a Best Supporting Actor.
No, that's too much of a curveball.
I thought it was so odd. It's like Johnny Depp getting nominated for an Oscar for Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah. It's bonkers, but stranger things have happened. And I just had money on it, that money on that unfolding. I don't know. As far as the comedy element goes, I think there is a reluctance to particularly tinker too much with the Oscar formula. Now, that is both a good thing and a bad. Something needs to change with the Oscars. And like you were asking about, are the Oscars struggling? The ratings are at an historic low now. And to be fair, they're not that entertaining to people who aren't film fanatics. But at the same time, when they have tried to introduce measures like they did with the most popular film, outstanding achievement in popular film, for the 5 minutes that idea was alive.
And we shouldn't forget that the likes of Sir Alfred Hitchcock, for example, never won an Oscar.
Yeah.
Got an honorary Oscar, never won an Oscar in his career.
You were talking about Kirk Douglas as well.
Same thing, yeah.
3 nominations, no Oscar.
Exactly.
And is it? Do you have to do it as a posthumous Oscar?
Yeah. It's the Scorsese thing, isn't it? It's like, does Martin Scorsese deserve an Oscar for The Departed when even the most staunch Scorsese fan will admit that is in no way even in the top 5? No. Scorsese. I mean, I personally disagree, but people don't generally regard that as one of his better works. So why give him the Oscar for that? Because he's owed it.
Yeah, I have to say though, I think in terms of a viewing thing to watch the Academy Awards, I feel like it has lost its pizzazz. As a film fan, in general, I used to get up as a kid, stay up all night, watch it because it was fun to do, like the days of Billy Crystal hosting and all that kind of stuff. And now we've got no host again this year. I always find it a little bit dry across the award season in general, but actually I thought the BAFTAs this year picked up with the humour. I think it worked really well with some of the, Rebel Wilson's speech that she gave. Or I thought
that spirit of it being slightly a roast.
Yeah.
That you're allowed to poke fun in the way that Ricky Gervais does brilliantly at the Golden Globes.
Absolutely. And again, I think the Golden Globes is a great example, although never always taken that seriously. No. It is a great predictor for what's going to happen at the Oscars. But, on that note, we talked about whether or not the credibility is there. Someone like Awkwafina, she won a Golden Globe, but we didn't even see a nomination at the Oscars for her. It's bizarre how it all kind of pans out this year, and not as predictable as we have probably thought in previous years.
Very much so.
Van and Rebecca are staying with us throughout the night, updating us on the Oscars. I think the ceremony has now begun, or is almost about to. We're going to give you all the results as they come in, and the thoughts of Rebecca and Van and Rebecca on talkSPORT Extra Time. Coming up, more of the football chat that we've been talking about this morning so far already, the results from the Championship games, and of course Premier League action, and we're talking rugby and cricket with our mate Russ Hargreaves on the way in about 10 minutes time on talkSPORT. Frankly, my dear, when it comes to the Oscars, we do give a damn, because we're joined now, as the results are pouring in, by Van Connor and Rebecca Perfect, Bex and Van, who do a great podcast together. Details on that on the way, and we've got some more results coming in. Now, we know that Brad Pitt won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar. What's the latest for us, Rebecca? Good morning once again.
Good morning, good morning. So, yes, there is the actress in a supporting role. So, we've got Laura Dern won it for Marriage Story, a Netflix movie. She thanked Netflix in her speech. It's also her birthday as well, so what a present for that.
Happy birthday, Laura.
And she was up against some great contenders here. Kathy Bates for Richard Jewell, Scarlett Johansson for Jojo Rabbit, Florence Pugh for Little Women, and Margot Robbie for Bombshell. A lovely heartfelt speech that she gave there. And again, we're slowly drip feeding those major awards coming through. We've also seen in sound editing Ford versus Ferrari. It's also picked up for film editing as well. And then we've got sound mixing. We thought, where's all the awards for 1917? Well, it's kicked off with sound mixing for it. And then there was another one which had 1917. Of course, it's cinematography. The great Roger Deakins has picked up the Academy Award for that, as well.
I'm so happy about that one.
Yeah,
Has
I
he
can tell.
directed a film, Roger Deakins, or am I dreaming that?
I do you know, I don't think he has.
okay.
No, but because we couldn't remember
Maybe I'm
what
mixing
he
with Roger Spottiswoode, the editor. Of
Yes.
the films. That's
Yeah.
what-
We couldn't
get
remember
me
what he
Roger's
won
confused.
for.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be, because, again, we covered it that year. It was Blade Runner 2049.
Brilliant film still.
Yes,
Gorgeous.
yeah, love that
And
film.
we've got the June remodel coming up this year, I think.
Yeah.
haven't we? Which
Denis
I'm looking forward
Villeneuve,
to.
yeah.
Fantastic stuff. And nothing for Joker so far, then, it seems.
Nothing so far, although I'm not ruling it out for Best Original Score for Guadagnino, for Hilda Guadagnino, and also, obviously, for Best Actor, I think. But we've got a few hours before that'll come yet. I think it's at least an hour until Joaquin picks up his awards and has his next
We
brand.
may well be off air by then, but keep it tuned to Talk Radio for the Oscar latest, and also our news will cover it as well in detail. I think a couple of films, though, have done. I think it was Turning Point and The Colour Purple have got the record for most nominations and not a single win. They both got nominated for 11
Wow.
Oscars, didn't get one.
So the front runner doesn't always pick
No,
it up.
that's the thing. And also,
yeah.
I think sometimes the votes get split. People think, oh, they're bound to get it for X, so we won't vote for them for Y.
Yeah.
Doesn't quite work out that way.
Yeah, because La La Land, I think, got a record 14 nominations when that was out, and
See, I love that film, and I think it
loved
really
it.
sustains La La Land. Whereas some films, I mean, I keep banging. I was boring Sam Stevens about it, not for the first time earlier. Films like The English Patient, which got loads of Oscars, but things you never hear. Let's stick on The English Patient.
Well, that's the thing. You do. I mean, you look at the history of films that have won Oscars, and the Kermode example is always that Driving Miss Daisy won, that particular year, and
Which I love.
no one's ever watched. No one watched Driving Miss Daisy that year and genuinely said this is the best film of the year.
No.
In the same way that I don't think anyone genuinely watched Green Book last year.
Yeah, I was
and
just about to
thought,
say Green Book.
That's the best film of the year.
Great film, though. It is Green Book.
yeah,
But a pretty good
Shape
film.
of Water, another
Yeah.
one. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I mean,
I must say, when I saw Shape of Water, I thought this is the best film of the year. I loved Shape of Water.
what happened to Mother, Paul?
Still like Mother. Mother was cruelly and criminally overlooked. Anything by Aronofsky you've got to love, surely.
Oh, yeah,
Black
yeah.
Swan, and Mother's a great film.
We debated many a show.
Well, the two that I can't remember where you stood on the other film I loved around that time, maybe slightly earlier, that Rachel Jewell, who does the news for us sometimes, but often on Talk Radio, The Tree of Life. Terrence Malick film. What
See,
a
I
masterpiece.
didn't catch Tree of Life, but I
masterpiece.
can't sit through a
Stay away.
Terrence Malick.
Stay away, Bex.
Oh, you.
I know your taste. Stay away.
I know, yeah. We were talking about The
Has
Lighthouse.
got Brad Pitt in it.
Oh, maybe.
Tree of Life.
What?
Yeah. It's got Brad Pitt. Yeah.
But we're talking, sometimes we get to see, obviously, a lot of the mainstream films, but there are those more art house movies that are out, things like that were up for the Independent Spirit Awards. So Robert Pattinson was up for The Lighthouse in that. And Van described it to me last week as two men that just go mad in a lighthouse. And I was like, it's definitely not for me.
I've seen that one. That is a cracker. I think
Yeah.
William Dafoe got the Spirit Award, and he said, "I'm sharing this with Robert Pattinson because basically it's a
It's a
double
two-hander,
hander."
yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, yeah, I mean, if whatever floats your boat with that, and I always encourage you to kind of go and see those more art house films if you can. And it's, we were discussing downstairs at Talk Radio about, Marriage Story, for instance. Like Netflix across the board has got 20 nominations at the Academy Awards. However, things like The Irishman is where they put all their eggs, really, in that respect, because they were pushing that because it's Scorsese, it's got all these amazing stalwarts of the gangster mob movie, history in there. But then when you look at something like Marriage Story, you kind of go, well, that's your little indie classic, isn't it? That's your little, the favourite that's kind of picking up those lovely little awards like the Best Supporting Actress. But, Netflix, again, The Two Popes, films that we wouldn't necessarily go to the cinema and see, but you can because you can access that here.
The interesting thing in those cases as well is they are projects that are sort of remnants of a different time. From like 10, 15 years ago, you look at something like Marriage Story, which has Miramax written all over it.
Yeah.
You look at something like The Two Popes, which has, Universal written all over it, sort of late 90s Universal kind of a look to it. Something like The Irishman, for instance, has the feel of a Paramount film. And it's weird that these exact studios do not make these projects anymore, but Netflix will just do all of them across the board.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing. It's shown that Netflix have range.
And the thing that Netflix is doing, which is kind of giving me a bit of a love-hate for it, is that it is taking us away from that traditional cinematic experience. It's only releasing things like the films like The Irishman for 2 weeks just to contend for the Academy Awards. But it is opening the door to letting people see more varied films that they wouldn't necessarily go and pay to go to the cinema to see. But because it's there in the comfort of their own home, they might go and watch a film like Roma. They might go and watch The Two Popes. I think that is a really positive thing for filmmaking, and it allows us to sort of see more diverse filmmaking, making a bit more of a comeback than what we've seen recently, particularly this year.
I mean, I do wonder, I hope it doesn't happen, but I do wonder whether there's an element of South Sea bubble about their financing, that eventually, because it's taking, I mean, they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars,
course, yeah.
and you kind of think eventually it might...
Yeah,
so they might expect more return, or they're going to have to maybe be more stringent about what they commission.
They do operate at a significant loss, Netflix, but because the brand is so big, they seem to think that it can be sustained over time. I mean, recently it came to light that Netflix were one of the contenders to be buying MGM. That MGM were courting an acquisition and had gone after Netflix, which usurped one of my theories, because I had genuine money on the idea that within the next 2 years, Netflix would try and buy Paramount. That was my theory, because if you think of the wealth of the catalogue,
to move into a major Hollywood player,
exactly,
and to inherit that back catalogue.
Well, exactly, it's the same kind of thing. I think it's Netflix and Apple were in contention for MGM, and my theory was that one of those two companies would have gone after Paramount. But I think that the MGM deal takes that idea off the table.
And in fact, we're also looking forward to another fragmentation of, not looking forward, anticipating, I suppose, because the Premier League, it's widely rumoured, are now going to be showing their own football matches throughout, so constant choice on that front, which again, I suppose, looking ahead, might mean that, as many people are thinking, the way that the BBC is funded is going to have to change, because I think at the moment I'm right in saying that if you subscribe to both Netflix and Amazon Prime, that is slightly less a month than the BBC licence.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I know you get a huge amount of choice, you get the radio and all that stuff from the BBC, but actually people are now thinking, well, actually, this shouldn't be an impost. This should maybe be something we volunteer or we choose to buy into, possibly.
It is amazing, totting it all up, how much we're spending on all of this. Like, I have all three of those and more that I subscribe to. And
but luckily, you never pay for a TV licence. I'm joking, of course.
I was like, whoa.
Before you get the knock on the door.
No, all paid.
I'll be realised. I don't watch live TV. I think my flatmate pays for a TV licence, but I don't watch. I've never asked. I don't watch telly. And
there, allowed rest the case for the defence.
Well, that's the thing. He specifically watches my flatmate watches football on Amazon Prime because it has all the weird options.
Well, I mean, they only went for a few days, but I'm sure they're going to be doing more of that in the future.
But yeah, that's.
Do you not need a licence if you're watching iPlayer though?
I don't watch iPlayer, to be really honest.
Okay.
I genuinely don't watch television.
Right.
Not a thing I do, ever, really. Other than, in fact,
You're missing out.
Not that badly. But to be honest, the only thing I watch is, at the moment, for the last month, I've been watching episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation on Netflix. Because of Star Trek Picard on Amazon Prime. But other than that, no, my TV watching's kind of died off. It's because it's awards season. I don't have time to actually sit and enjoy anything.
They're the perfect guest for us this morning. Remind us where we can hear your podcast, Van and Rebecca.
Well, I'm going to pass it over to Bex, because Bex never gets to plug us. So.
Oh, well, you can hear us on all podcast platforms. We are called Offscreen as our podcast. It's your 7-day guide to everything movies. So on the big screen, on the small screen, on your streaming platforms, we talk about it all week, every week, and we give you everything that's out, really.
And on talkSPORT and Talk Radio, that's Rebecca Perfect and Van Connor, our special guest this morning. You might try and squeeze in one more update between now and 4 a.m, but keep it tuned to talkSPORT for the very latest news headlines at the top of the hour. Coming up, though, we are talking the back pages of today's papers, also sharing with you some of the big sporting anniversaries and birthdays of this day in history. All that and more still to come on talkSPORT. So we've covered the rugby, done some cricket for you, talked about the new mental health initiative Heads Up, courtesy of brilliant guest there, Andy Lane, one of the world's leading sports psychologists. A more football conversation on the way, but also a big competition is happening tonight, even as we speak, and we're giving you live updates on it. It's the Oscars, the 92nd Academy Awards, and in the studio with me absolutely live throughout the morning is Van Connor and Rebecca Perfect, the perfect guest to talk Oscars with us. But we've got a question for you both. I know we've got some results too, but very quickly, Van, we've had this in from Luke Lewis. Why hasn't Avengers Endgame been nominated for any Oscars, even though many critics were raving about it, and it's the highest grossing film of all time, or at least one of them? I thought it got some kind of technical nominations.
It has been nominated for Best Visual Effects, which I think Bex and I were saying makes absolute sense for Avengers. I mean, particularly, for nothing other than Thanos, really, you'd give it the effects, because Thanos has an incredible effect.
The bad guy, of course. For
the villain of it, Josh Brolin, which is an entirely motion-captured performance. One of
was
two.
Andy Serkis busy then?
Yes.
Exactly what it is. But I am waiting for Andy Serkis to sort of rejoin the Marvel Universe in a motion capture role, because he's done it in live action form. He was a Black Panther and Age of Ultron villain. To see him to add his motion capture to the Marvelverse, I believe, if my memory serves, he did give Mark Ruffalo some coaching on his Hulk performance.
Because he runs a kind of motion capture class or group. I mean, he teaches other
He
actors
does.
how to do it, doesn't he?
Well, he does. I mean, as well. He's gone into directing himself through that company. He has an adaptation of Animal Farm coming out in the next couple of years.
Oh, right.
Orwell's Animal Farm. He had his version of The Jungle Book this past year, which I believe was just Mowgli, wasn't it? Was that the one that was called Mowgli?
Yeah.
And that was his second directorial effort. His first one was Breathe with Andrew Garfield and Claire Foy. But that noticeably, again, that debut was a completely live action project that then obviously I think was sort of cutting his teeth for finishing up the motion capture CG hybrid one.
And let's have some of the results we've had so far, Rebecca, if you'd be so kind.
Well, one of the big awards of the night is for Best Supporting Actor, and that goes to Brad Pitt, unsurprisingly. So we did say it was going to be predictable. We're waiting to see exactly what his speech said to find out whether or not he did bring the laughs, as he has done in every award.
So that was for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was his second film with Tarantino, wasn't it?
Yes.
After Inglourious Bar Stewards.
Yes, it was indeed.
The
but
pub movie.
It's also technically his second Oscar as well, because he got a producing Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, so he was part of what we like to call the ensemble team.
Yes, yeah.
But this is a personal award for him. We've also had animated feature film. That's been won by Toy Story 4 as well. I had my money on Klaus for that, the Netflix film Klaus. But Toy Story 4, and again, another fun fact for that, it's the second sequel of the franchise to have won an Oscar. So Toy Story 3 also won an Oscar, so we're now seeing Toy Story 4.
What was wrong with Toy Story 1 and 2 then?
That's what I think. I think it lost out to Frozen on those years.
I think the first Toy Story did win an Oscar. If memory serves.
Really?
I think
Toy
the
Story
first
2
one
didn't get it.
Toy Story 2 didn't, but I think, like I say, it's the first franchise to have
the
two
sequel.
sequels win.
Again,
But
I think it's
obviously,
the Frozen year that Toy Story 2 just didn't win. Costume design goes to Little Women, which is unsurprising there. And then we've got animated short is for Hair Love, which is great from a diversity perspective. That's a fantastic film from that side of things. And then adapted screenplay, Jojo Rabbit has won that. And then Parasite, interestingly, has won Best Original Screenplay. And we were just talking downstairs about whether or not that is a predictor for Best Picture. Some theories would suggest that is a good sort of indicator of what's to come. So it might be the underdog. It might be the one that starts taking more of the sweep across the awards.
So would that be the first foreign language film, do we think, that's won Best Screenplay, Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars? I'm trying to think of another one that may have done that. I can't think of one.
Off the top of my head, no,
not to
either.
our knowledge.
It's quite an unusual choice. I mean, fair play, I'm sure. I've not seen Parasite yet, but it must be difficult to judge the dialogue if you're only watching it in subtitles.
Do you know what, though? I think I watched it yesterday for the first time, and I have to say that the writing is what really stands out to me above everything else. It's clever, it's witty, it's dark, it's ferocious at the same time, and yet it just moves in so many different directions. And to be completely consumed by it as a subtitled film for us, it doesn't matter. You know, and that's the big thing about it.
And how would you say the Oscars are working without a host once again, Ben, this year?
They seem to be flowing along well enough. Like I say, the Oscars are basically a big variety show anyway. Each award is presented by a different host, and they seem to be carrying it in that sort of way. It's just by whittling down the host element, what they've done effectively is sped it up.
Yeah.
Which I think it has always needed in one sense.
But you missed that, or maybe they didn't, maybe they found a way of doing it, but I do miss that opening kind of where everybody gets a spray. That opening, and you mentioned on Billy Crystal. I mean, one of the masters of doing it.
Absolutely. You know, and I thought Ellen did a really good job, you know, when she was on hosting duties as well. Whether or not we think it lost something this year, I'm not sure. But last year, I think it was obviously overridden by the whole kind of controversy with Kevin Hart anyway. But it was interesting to see how they played it last year, and will they revert back to what they originally did? But no, they're carrying on this way. I
thought it was very interesting that the announcement that this year would be the second year to not feature a host came the morning after Ricky Gervais hosted the Golden Globes. I thought the timing on that was not a coincidence, and I think it was very much, especially given the fact that one of his jokes when he opened the Golden Globes was specifically about Kevin Hart's tweets and him pointing to himself and saying, "Look, no one paid attention to me," obviously. The fact that they then the following day announced, we're not having a host this year, I think just meant that the Academy obviously looked at that and just thought, no, we can't possibly risk that.
I would have loved the actual announcement to have been, and we're taking on Ricky Gervais for the Oscars.
So many hosts, so many potential hosts that they've yet to tap into. And you look at people, especially within the sort of the topical news comedy realm, people like John Oliver, like Trevor Noah. Yeah. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, even James Corden. You just think like, talk show
leave him
hosts.
to the Tonys.
There's people you could get there that would really work.
Talking of James James Corden. No awards yet then for Cats.
Oh, imagine that.
Were there any nominations for Cats? Did they get a special effects
No,
nomination?
they actually pulled Cats from consideration for nominations in its opening week. I mean, I couldn't possibly hazard a guess as to why, although the fact that it has actually swept the Razzie nominations this week might be a bit of an indicator.
And for those who don't know, the Razzies are like for the worst or most ridiculous films, as in raspberries. That's what they give it for, isn't it? Have you seen Cats?
No, do you know what? I dodged that bullet. But I am intrigued to see it. But I've never seen the musical, and I've never had a real interest in it. So for me to kind of go out of my way to go and watch it, do you know what? If it makes its way to Netflix, I'll give it a watch.
It'll be on there, probably sooner rather than later, wouldn't it? That's the thing about it.
I think it would genuinely take someone with permanent brain damage to possibly enjoy Cats. It really would. It's a deranged film. It is an absolutely
But the thing
bonkers
is
affair.
that isn't the original poems that it's based on, it's very sort of bizarre in itself. So
Well, I mean, they're originally nonsense poems by T.S. Eliot, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, apart from one, which is the song they got memories from, on Midnight, that one comes from one of his more serious poems. But the stage show, I suppose, kind of works in that you're in a weird world. The bits I've seen, people like Idris Elba and Dame Judi Dench done up as moggies, you just think this is like a magic mushroom bad trip.
well, the internet did have a field day when the trailer dropped, and everyone was going, "What have they done to Dame Judy?"
And then James Corden saying, "I've not seen it yet," which I suspect might be a bit of a fib.
I
But I
suspect
suppose
so.
he's even trying to distance himself even from having seen it.
Actually, that might genuinely be true in the case of Cats, because the film wasn't finished. I think it was you that told me initially that the film wasn't finished until it was finished at 8 a.m. on the Saturday. We got press shown it on the Tuesday at 6:30.
Yeah,
so
I think it was even tighter than that, actually. So Tom Hooper was working very hard for that.
Not that hard.
Not that. One of my favourite speeches actually came from the BAFTAs, where Rebel Wilson was talking about the dress that she wore, because it was dressed in two halves, and she was saying, I think the sparkly half was like her showgirl, and the second half was the dress that she wore to the funeral for the film Cats.
Oh, very good. And if you want to hear more of Rebecca and Van, I'm sure you do, Rebecca Perfect and Van Connor, tell us about the podcast, Van.
Yeah, well, every Friday on podcast platforms. We'll be returning this week, as usual. We'll be what are we reviewing this next week? We get to talk about
Emma. It's Valentine's Day this week. We've got Emma.
Week.
Yeah, so Van will pull out some weird action movie
these
as well.
Jane Austen films every 5 years?
Do you know what? They do them in like a batch, because actually not only have we got the Jane Austen films, but we've got the David Copperfield film is out at the moment. So if you're like into your period dramas, that's great. But if you're not, you're a bit like, really?
Actually,
more of this?
So funny as well, because when I was watching Emma last week, I remember I think I went to the bathroom.
You loved it.
I did love it, but just before I went to the bathroom, I was thinking before the film, I went to the bathroom, thinking to myself, I'm sure it's only been about 5 minutes since we had that Gwyneth Paltrow version, and I looked it up.
20 years.
1996. It was been 24 years.
Yeah.
Since Gwyneth Paltrow and
course,
Toni Collette were...
Emma inspired one of the great kind of California films, didn't it, in Clueless?
Clueless, indeed.
Yeah, I'd much rather watch Clueless.
It's so weird. You know, if you watch a version of Emma now and you get Mr. Elton, and
Yeah.
like, oh, I see. Yeah, he's meant to be Jeremy Sisto. That one's Paul Rudd. Oh, I get this. Yeah, I remember now.
That's how you teach Jane Austen to GCSE students.
not the Cliff's Notes that Cher says.
More from Rebecca and Van in the next hour of the programme, giving you the Oscars update. Coming up as well, I'm going through the back pages and some of the insides of today's papers with Sam Stevens, top producer and co-presenter. All that and some boxing on the way for you on talkSPORT Extra Time. So they're back again. It's Rebecca Perfect and Van Connor keeping an eye on things all Oscar-related for us, happening over there live as we speak on the west coast of America. Welcome back, both of you. Thanks so much for your time this morning. I know the coverage is continuing on Talk Radio. What's the latest, Rebecca? Any more
We've
announcements?
finally got a win for Joker.
Oh, God.
It took all night.
Yeah, it took all night for the most
They paid their Joker like it's a knockout.
Yeah, it's a best original score. So one we predicted would be the winner for Joker, as well as we're waiting in anticipation.
Can
for
I
Best
just say the
Actor.
name? Because I spent a lot of time
Yes.
practicing and
Yes,
learning
please
the
do.
name. Hilda Guadagnatia.
Hilda Guadagnatia.
Guadagnatia. Yep. I spent a long time learning that.
And I did it first take.
Yeah.
Not that I'm showing off. Hilda
You're the pro.
Guadagnatia. Hilda Guadagnatia.
Yeah, you're the pro, man. That's what it is.
So that's a good example. So maybe that'll be the start of the more creative Oscars coming in, certainly for Joker.
Well,
Yeah.
we shall see in the next 20 minutes, I'd imagine. We'll see either Best Actor or Actress in the next 20 minutes.
Yes.
So, should we see? It could be Joaquin still.
Yeah, I think our predictions for that are Joaquin Phoenix, and then also see Renee Zellweger for Judy as well. Yeah, so those are the big front runners for there. Parasite has also picked up Best International Feature Film, which is a historic moment for the film, because it's the first South Korean movie to win an Academy Award for that particular category.
Right.
So that's big news for Parasite, which is good. And whether or not it does a Roma and doesn't actually pick up the big Best Film Award, we're not sure if it's going to go down that route or not. If it follows in the footsteps of Roma, it won't, or it might be the big upstart and actually pick up the big award.
And I think that would surely be the first time a film had won Best International Foreign Film and Best Film.
Yeah.
We all
pretty
became
sure.
close,
Yeah.
didn't we, with Roma? There was a suspicion that it could have happened with Roma. It never did. I mean, the other award that we talk much about, on either station tonight, is the Best Makeup Award, which has gone to Bombshell, which deservedly so, because I think the makeup effects in that are genuinely impressive. The very subtle way that Charlize Theron has been sort of altered to look more like Megyn Kelly, in that way that you look
and
at
that's
her
about
in
the
that
kind of
film.
sexual harassment scandal inside Fox News, I think.
It is, yeah, and Roger Ailes and just the corporate culture at Fox News at that time. But the very subtle way that they altered Charlize Theron is in such a way that you look at her in that film and you know it's Charlize Theron, but you can't tell what they've changed somehow.
I didn't know it was Charlize Theron. We joked about this when we reviewed it, that actually we knew Charlize Theron was in the movie, but she's in it from the very start. And actually I was sat there going, when's Charlize Theron going to come on screen? 'Cause it was
her performance in Monster had that effect on me as well. Didn't quite spot her.
Well, I say because Charlize Theron is arguably was really the first actress, I think, to properly get the critical acclaim for the heavy makeup, prosthetic. I don't want to use the T word, transformative performance. In which there was a literal... I despise the word transformative.
I quite like the words Hilda and Guadnatia.
You're just showing off now, Paul. That's what that is.
Okay, let me ask you finally. We started talking about diversity or the lack of it in the Oscars, and you spotted that somebody was wearing an interesting... I think it was a cape, wasn't it, which had some names in it.
Natalie Portman was wearing a cape embroidered with the names of all the female directors that were snubbed for a nomination for Best Director.
Not just any cape, but because it's Natalie Portman and her brand sponsorship being what it is, it had to be Dior.
Of course.
With
But
the names of directors
quite
like
the
Lulu
statement,
Wang.
quite the subtle statement, I think, and obviously that's picked up some of the headlines. I haven't seen whether or not there have been any speeches which have talked about diversity. Joaquin Phoenix did a very strong speech at the BAFTAs, so when he picks up his award, I'm going to predict that. If he picks up his award, we'll expect
just
something.
go with it, Glenn.
Yeah, I
Go
think
with
it is going to be the
Yeah.
case. So yeah, we can expect that then. But it's been, as we said, it's been quite a predictable Oscars in some ways. Ford versus Ferrari has been a bit of a surprise for sound editing and for film editing as well.
And also, I think it's the first time a motor racing film's been nominated in the Best Film category.
Yeah.
And there have been some great... I mean, I love the original Le Mans, the Steve McQueen film. It's a fantastic movie. This one's very different, though, isn't it? Much more of a kind of narrative thrust.
I mean, I remember coming out of Ford v Ferrari. I absolutely loved the film. I thought it's a great movie. I haven't had the chance to revisit it, actually, over the last few months. I saw it at the LFF, and I've not revisited it since. But I just had such a great time with it. But I do remember talking to a friend of mine who's really into his motorsports, really into his Formula One, anything with four wheels. And
He even loves the Flintstones movies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, technically they're two wheels. Technically, the Flintstones, logs, aren't they? But
Wow,
I do
the
remember.
pedants are revolting.
I do remember saying to him though that technically speaking, Ford v Ferrari is the single best movie ever made about motorsport, and I still stick to that now.
Brilliant stuff. And remind us, Rebecca, how we can hear you and Van going at it on a weekly basis via your podcast.
Via our podcast, yes.
Stop making
Why
up
are we
your own
going
jokes.
at it?
Stop making... I mean,
We're
talking
chatting
movies, debating. Yeah.
We're actually chatting movies on all platforms, so from the big screen to the small screen, and also on all your streaming platforms as well. The podcast is called Off Screen. You can catch us on all podcast platforms, and it's basically your 7-day guide to everything movies.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Eddie. Really appreciate your company this morning. That was Van Connor. That was Rebecca Perfect. You can keep listening to them over on Talk Radio. Coming up, we've got to look back at some of the big interviews on this show this morning. All that and more still to come on talkSPORT Extra Time.